Hello, anatomy friends. This is Dr. Alsup, and in this video, we will be discussing bone remodeling and then factors that affect bone growth and remodeling. This is a bit more of a complex video. There are a lot of important topics here, so we will take our time and we'll work through each one. You have two learning objectives to work through. One's going to be focused on bone remodeling, and then the other are those factors that are going to affect growth. So let's start with bone remodeling. So even after bones have reached their adult sizes and shapes, they will continue to change and remodel throughout life. They are dynamic, they are not static. So, bone remodeling is going to be that ongoing replacement of old osseous tissue or bony tissue with new. And this is a natural process. It is not pathological necessarily. So, at any given time, about 5% of your total bone mass is being remodeled, give or takes. But those renewal rates will differ with the type of bone. So, spongy bone remodels more often than compact bone. In fact, there are different rates of remodeling in different parts of the same bone. So, if we take the femur, for example, or that bone of the thigh, its distal portion, which is mostly spongy bone, is replaced every 4 months or so, so relatively quickly. But the diaphysis of the femur, which is almost all compact bone, is barely remodeled throughout a lifetime. So there can be big differences there. In remodeling, an osteoclast will break down bone, and osteoblasts will follow to rebuild. And they're going to do this in unison. This serves to renew the osseous tissue before natural deterioration will take place. So, why would you have this increased work to remodel something that may seem perfectly fine? Well, new osseous tissue tends to be less brittle and it will be stronger than the older or aging osseous tissue. But also importantly, bone will remodel in response to demands placed on it, meaning that if you subject a bone to heavy loads, such as in weightlifting or other activities, such as something like trail hiking or a million other things, that will produce osseous tissue that is thicker and stronger than the old osseous tissue along those lines of mechanical stress. And that can change throughout your lifetime. Let's move to factors that affect bone growth. Specifically, we're going to be talking about minerals, vitamins, and hormones. Lots and lots and lots of hormones. And you've probably heard these terms your whole life, but let's make sure we actually understand this terminology. So, minerals are going to be inorganic elements that occur naturally on Earth. Around 4-ish% of our total body weight is minerals, and the bulk of the minerals in the body are stored in the skeleton. The big one here is going to be calcium. But there are others like phosphorus and magnesium, or a few others we'll discuss. Vitamins are organic nutrients that are important in maintaining growth and natural metabolism. And then lastly, but very importantly, we're going to have hormones. And hormones are molecules that are released in one part of the body via specific glands, but they're going to regulate the activity of other cells and other parts of the body. And these are going to be part of what's referred to as the endocrine system. So endocrine glands, illustrated over here on the right, will secrete hormones into the interstitial fluid, which will eventually diffuse into the blood, where the hormone will circulate its way to the target tissue. So we'll talk about a few of these specific endocrine glands. All right, let's start with each one of these categories and getting into a bit more detail. And we'll start with minerals. And as I mentioned, calcium is going to be the most important mineral when we're talking about the skeletal system. Calcium homeostasis influences bone growth, as you might guess in this video. But importantly, it's also essential and I mean essential, to many physiological processes in other parts of the body. So, for example, both muscle and nerve cells need calcium to work properly. Calcium is also required for blood clotting. So it's going to play more than a role than just in the skeleton. But 99% of the total body calcium is stored in the skeleton. So you can imagine that if the blood calcium levels are too low, which would be bad for, say, that function of the muscles or the nerves, we need to increase the blood calcium levels by releasing some of the calcium from its storage spot in the skeleton. So controlling the movement of the calcium from its storage spot between the bones and the blood is so important, and that's really where hormones will come into play, and we'll discuss those shortly. Calcium isn't the only mineral associated with bone. You will have phosphorus, pretty importantly, magnesium, fluoride. They'll have functions as well associated with the skeletal system. But for our purposes in this course, we're going to focus on calcium. Certain vitamins will play a role in bone growth and remodeling. Vitamin A is going to stimulate osteoblasts to secrete collagen for the extracellular matrix. Vitamin C, K, and B12 will play a role in synthesis of osseous tissue proteins, so all important there. And lastly, vitamin D will help build osseous tissue by increasing the absorption of calcium from foods in the gastrointestinal or the GI tract from that ingested food. And we'll talk a bit more about vitamin D in a moment, specifically its active form. That's going to be a little bit different, but that's going to play a role in an important role in bone maintenance. All right, we've made it to hormones. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of hormones that will play a role in bone growth. And we will start with human growth hormone, or HGH, which is secreted by the anterior portion of the pituitary gland. And its main function is to promote the synthesis and secretion of something called insulin growth factors, or IGFs, which are named IGFs because some of the effects are very similar to insulin. IGFs will increase growth rates by stimulating osteoblasts and cell division at the epiphyseal plates, as well as the cells associated with the deep portions of the periosteum. And it will also increase the synthesis of proteins necessary for bone. Now, importantly, IGFs don't just affect bone. In fact, many of its more major functions are in the liver with the elevation of blood glucose, but it does play a role here in the skeletal system as well. Moving to two hormones secreted by the thyroid gland, which is a gland that is located in the deep neck, just anterior to the trachea. And as you might guess, the thyroid gland is going to secrete thyroid hormone, which has many effects, of which we aren't going to get into for this section. But as it relates to bone, thyroid hormone promotes bone growth by stimulating osteoblasts. The other major hormone secreted by the thyroid gland that affects the skeletal system is calcitonin. Sometimes you see it abbreviated as CT, which we also use for connective tissue, so keep that in mind. Calcitonin will decrease blood calcium levels by inhibiting osteoclast activity. It will also accelerate the uptake of calcium into the bony extracellular matrix, which promotes bone formation. So this is going to be important in terms of storage of the calcium in the skeletal system. There are a neighboring collection of glands to the thyroid gland. They're typically located just posterior, called the parathyroid glands. And generally there's four. There can be more, there can be less. And they're located just on the back of the thyroid gland, or just posterior to them. And for something that's so close, the hormone that's secreted by the parathyroid gland, called the parathyroid hormones, has an opposite effect to those hormones secreted by the thyroid gland. So it's really PTH, or parathyroid hormone, that is the major regulator of blood calcium levels, in addition to phosphorus and magnesium. Its major effect is to increase osteoclast activity, to break down the extracellular matrix, and to release that calcium into the blood, which will increase blood calcium levels. So if blood calcium levels are low, PTH will be released by the parathyroid glands, and this will initiate osteoclast to get to work. PTH will also affect the kidney to form and secrete calcitriol. So let's talk a little bit more about this calcitriol. And calcitriol, not calcitonin, don't get those terms confused. They're very closely named, but they have very different, they're going to have different functions and secreted by different things. Calcitriol is going to be the active form of vitamin D. And so vitamin D can either be ingested, as we discussed earlier when we were talking about that earlier, but it can also be manufactured internally. And this is first initiated in the skin by absorption of sunlight, and then going through a process in the liver to form the circulating form of vitamin D, to eventually in the kidneys having vitamin D transformed into calcitriol. And so the synthesis of vitamin D facilitates calcium absorption from food in the GI tract into the blood, and that can help in terms of rebuilding of bone tissue if necessary. Lastly, we have the sex hormones, primarily estrogens and testosterone. At puberty, these hormones have a dramatic impact on bone growth by increasing osteoblast activity that really promotes those growth spurts that can occur during puberty. As you might imagine, the sex hormones effects are certainly not limited to just affecting bone, and you will discuss those roles in other areas of the course, specifically when you're talking about the endocrine system. All right, excellent. We have reached the practice question. I really want us to feel confident in this answer before moving on. So here's the question. If blood calcium levels are low, which hormone may be secreted in order to maintain homeostasis? So pause the video to land on your answer, and when you're ready, let's discuss how C, or parathyroid hormone, is correct. So parathyroid hormone, or PTH, is the major regulator of blood calcium levels. And so if blood calcium levels are low, we need to get more calcium in there. And this is done by initiating the osteoclast to break down the extracellular matrix to allow calcium to enter the bloodstream. Calcitonin is not correct. It will kind of do the opposite. It will inhibit osteoclasts and so decrease blood calcium levels. It also accelerates the uptake of calcium into the bony extracellular matrix. Human growth hormone will stimulate osteoblasts, not osteoclasts primarily. And testosterone, which is one of the sex hormones, it has many effects, but increasing blood calcium levels isn't one. It can increase osteoblasts, not clast activity. So all signs point towards C, parathyroid hormone, being the correct answer here. Excellent. Thank you so much for your time and your energy here.